A traditional samurai has entered the lands between, who mastered the art of wielding bows and naginatas. This samurai overwhelms its targets with maximum thrust damage with lifesteal and immense bleed procs. It is also versatile in many situations thanks to its hard-hitting arrows. So if you are looking for another broken and yet fun samurai build to play, the Bloodthirst Samurai build is for you. The Bloodthirst Samurai traversed the fog and entered the lands between, wanting to take the Elden throne. A fierce warrior who is highly trained in wielding naginatas and bows and can adapt in many situations in combat. Being able to fire multiple hard-hitting arrows from a distance and can take out and bait enemies is one of the strengths of this build, while having the ability to deal massive damage in melee range with multiple and quick thrust attacks. Additionally, the Bloodthirst Samurai absorbs the blood of its enemies to sustain itself in combat. Moving on to the build stats, and before we start, your priority stats may change later on, so keep this in mind. But for now, here's my stat spread for the quality build first. I allocated 50 points of vigor to give the user fair survivability in combat. You are always welcome to adjust this to 60 points if you think you really need more health while adjusting to this build's gameplay. This setup requires a small amount of focus points on the other hand to perform optimally in combat, so 20 points were allocated to mine. Enemies will die quickly anyway, so we don't need many points to mine. For endurance, I find 25 endurance just right for this playstyle, and more into this later on. Strength and dexterity are going to be our main offensive stats in this build, allocating 72 to strength and 67 to dexterity, while 25 points were added to fate so we can cast our key buffs later on. Lastly, no points were added to intelligence and arcane for this specific configuration. Now if you are playing at level 150, I got you covered and I am showing them on the screen right now. Time for the build's equipment, and for the build's identity, we will be using the Cross Naginata as the main damage dealing weapon for this build. This Naginata requires 16 strength and 20 dexterity for the user to wield the weapon properly, while having B scaling for strength and B for dexterity if the user sets it on quality. I decided to infuse the weapon with the quality affinity to have better scaling, which lead to a higher attack rating. Now for the Cross Naginata's Ashes of War, we will be using blood tax for this setup. In this configuration, it will deal an insane amount of damage while maintaining its ease of use and provides the user with the ability to regain health when blood tax hits the targets. Pressing L2 once will let the user perform a violent multi-hitting thrust, making enemies suffer continuous damage which can ramp up blood loss easily. Moving on to the build's secondary weapon, and I am using Finger Seal to be able to cast our key buffs later on. Another secondary weapon is Ansbach's Longbow, which is going to be our main range weapon for this build. This bow's unique skill, Fan Shot, allows the user to shoot 8 arrows simultaneously in a spread motion. So if the targets are hit at point blank, they will receive more damage. For the arrows, I'm using Fletch Bloodbone arrows to match the build's theme. Using these arrows help me to ramp up bleed procs before approaching my target. If you don't have this type of arrow, you can use the regular arrows and that is completely fine. However, I know a lot of people who don't like to use bows and it's not an issue. You are always welcome to not use this bow and focus on mastering the Cross Naginata. Moving on to my suggested spells, and the first one on the list is of course our staple Flame Grant Me Strength incantation for the additional 20% physical damage attack boost and stamina recovery buff. The second buff on the list is of course Golden Vow. This buff increases overall damage by 15% and adds 10% damage negation, which is very helpful for this build. Next is Blood Flame Blade, so we can drastically speed up bleed procs to targets. It pairs well with the Blood Tax Ashes of War because of this skill's multi-hitting attack animation. Remember that I mentioned that we will be having stats variation in this setup. It is because of the Blood Flame Blade's usage. When you already applied the Blood Flame Blade and switch to your bow stance, it will remove the Blood Flame buff, so keep this in mind. Make sure the buff is already expired before you switch. If you find yourself constantly switching stances, I suggest changing the weapon's affinity to blood instead of quality and respec to dexterity and arcane in terms of stats. You can't use the Blood Flame Blade in this setup, however, you have higher innate blood loss value but will have lower attack rating. I chose to maintain the quality build because I prefer using the Blood Flame Blade. After all, it is much cooler and I want more attack rating. DLC bosses have higher resistance to bleed, so having a higher attack rating would be beneficial. As always, if you find this guide useful, subscribing to the channel and liking this video sure helps me a lot, and thank you for your support. Moving on to my suggested talismans, and the first one on the list is our staple Shard of Alexander for the 15% skill damage increase. The next talisman for this build is of course our Lord of Blood's Exaltation, since you will be dealing with fast and frequent bleed procs in this build. When it activates, you can easily burst down your targets and end the fight. If the enemy doesn't bleed, you are always welcome to replace Lord of Blood's Exaltation with Two-Headed Turtle Talisman for better stamina regeneration. For the third and final slot, we are dealing with quick and multi-hitting attacks as the main damage dealing source in this build. Slotting in Millicent's Prosthesis and Rotting Wing Sword Insignia is beneficial for this build. Moving on to my Flash of Wonders Physique combination, slotting in Thorny Cracktire is a no-brainer for this build. I paired it with Blood-Sucking Cracktire for an additional damage multiplier, and the lifesteal that the Blood Tax provides can offset the HP loss per second that this tier inflicts on the user. For the Great Runes, I suggest slotting in Godric's Great Rune for the additional 5 stats across the board. Moving on to the Bloodthirst Samurai's armor set, I'm going for this traditional samurai theme, so I equipped the Land of Reed's helm, gauntlets, and leggings while having white reeds for the armor. Matches the traditional samurai theme that I am going for. It's time for the build's pros and cons, and starting with pros first. The first one on the list is of course the insane damage output of this build. Blood Tax has a great multiplier which can do burst damage in a single opening or damage window. Its desirable quick animation can be used in a lot of situations. This build's phenomenal damage gets even better because of the build's ability to inflict bleed procs because of the Blood Tax animation. So when using this build, expect bursting down targets easily. And of course, the Blood Tax additional lifesteal mechanic can be a huge help to many players, adding more sustainability and survivability to the build. The next one is fun factor and versatility. It's very rare for me to use bows in my builds, but to be honest, I enjoy using Ansbach's longbow, as it made me feel that I was like a real traditional samurai who can use bows and naginatas. Using Ansbach's longbow as my main range attack dealing weapon rewarded me with fresh experiences. The last advantage that I can think of for this build is focus points efficiency. The Blood Tax requires 15 focus points and 12 focus points for the fan shot, so it will take numerous skill casts before you flash again. Moving on to the cons, and to be honest, this is one of the setups that I can think of much negative since this is another S tier build. One con that I can think of is not everyone will want to use bows. Switching stances takes time to master, so a lot of people may find using bows and switching to melee weapons is a little bit clunky. But as I mentioned, you can just drop the bow and focus on using the Naginata and call it a day. Next is of course another overpowered build thanks to the bleed procs. There are players who hate to trivialize the game and would like to have this quote-unquote fair experience. The Bloodthirst Samurai is a very strong build to play, making it a truly an S tier setup, dealing with huge damage numbers in short bursts while giving the user sustainability is really out of this world. If you are the type of player who loves to breeze through the game while portraying as a traditional samurai who is adept in range and melee combat, this build is for you. While if you are the type who hates overpowered builds, you might want to skip this one as enemies and bosses will be dropping like flies. The Bloodthirst Samurai is a sure S tier build, but if you are looking for a different setup to play like the Iron Berserker who smashes enemies with its greatsword or be the best Moonveil user out there, these build videos are for you. Thank you for watching and don't forget to subscribe and liking the video. I will catch you on the next one.